The afternoon sun beat down on Naval Base San Diego as Lieutenant Commander Riley Chen walked across the dusty parking lot toward the main mess hall. She'd been on base for exactly 4 days now, transferred from her previous assignment in Virginia to take on a new role as a combat tactics instructor. The smell of salt water mixed with diesel fuel filled the air, a scent she'd grown familiar with over her 12 years of service. Riley was tired. The kind of tired that settles deep into your bones after spending 3 weeks processing paperwork, attending briefings, and sitting through orientation meetings that seemed to stretch on forever. She'd been up since 4 that morning dealing with administrative issues, and all she wanted was a quiet meal before heading back to her temporary quarters. She pushed through the heavy metal doors of the mess hall and was immediately hit by the familiar sounds and smells of military dining. The clatter of trays, the hum of conversation, the aroma of whatever the cooks had prepared for lunch. It was Tuesday, which usually meant some variation of chicken and rice. She grabbed a tray and moved through the line, nodding politely to the staff serving food. At 5'4" and 130 pounds, Riley didn't exactly fit the stereotype of what most people imagined when they thought of Special Operations Forces. She had her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore standard issue fatigues that had seen better days. The name tape on her chest read Chen, but her rank insignia was missing. She'd sent her uniforms to the base laundry 3 days ago, and they'd somehow lost all her patches and insignia. The laundry supervisor promised they'd turn up eventually, but until then she looked like any other service member on base. Riley found an empty table near the back corner of the mess hall. She preferred eating alone when she could, not because she was antisocial, but because meals were one of the few times during the day when she could just exist without having to be on. No need to maintain command presence, no need to evaluate training scenarios, no need to be constantly aware of every detail around her. Just 15 minutes of peace with some overcooked chicken and slightly mushy rice. She was 3 bites into her meal when she noticed them. 5 young guys, recruits by the look of them, probably not more than a few weeks into their training. They sat 2 tables away, loud and full of that particular brand of confidence that comes from being in the military, but not yet understanding what that actually means. The kind of guys who thought they knew everything because they'd made it through basic training. One of them, a tall kid with broad shoulders and a crew cut so fresh it must have been done that morning, kept glancing in her direction. Riley noticed but didn't react. She'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the best response was no response at all. She took another bite of her chicken and reached for her water bottle. "Dude, check it out," the tall one said to his friends, not bothering to lower his voice. "They're really letting anybody in these days, huh?" His buddies laughed. Riley's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her eyes on her food. She knew where this was going. She'd been through versions of this conversation more times than she could count. The tall recruit stood up. His friends followed, all 5 of them moving toward her table like a pack of wolves who thought they'd found easy prey. Riley set down her fork slowly and took a drink of water, watching them approach in her peripheral vision. Every move they made, every step they took, she cataloged it all without appearing to pay them any attention. They spread out around her table, not quite surrounding her but getting close. The tall one seemed to be their ringleader. He had the kind of face that probably got him a lot of attention back home. Strong jawline, bright blue eyes, the kind of natural athleticism that made physical training easy for him. His name tape read Brewster. "Hey there," Brewster said, leaning one hand on her table. "You new here?" Riley looked up at him, her face neutral. "I'm eating lunch." "Yeah, I can see that," he continued, that cocky grin spreading wider. "Just wondering if you need any help finding your way around. This base can be pretty overwhelming for new recruits. Lot of rules, lot of physical standards you gotta meet." One of his friends snickered. Another one, shorter with red hair and freckles covering his face, chimed in. "No offense, but you look a little small for this kind of work. Have you thought about maybe trying for an administrative position? There's no shame in working behind a desk." Riley took another sip of her water. She could feel the familiar calm settling over her. The same feeling she got before jumping out of a plane or breaching a door in hostile territory. Time seemed to slow down just a little. Her heartbeat remained steady. She'd been in far more dangerous situations than this. "I appreciate your concern," she said evenly, "but I'm fine where I am." Brewster pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without invitation. The others remained standing, forming a loose semicircle that blocked her most direct path to the exit. They probably didn't even realize they were doing it. It was just instinct. The kind of intimidation tactic that guys like this had been using their whole lives without really thinking about it. See, here's the thing, Brewster continued, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. A lot of people join up thinking they're gonna be action heroes, you know? They watch too many movies. But the reality is there's a reason why certain jobs have certain physical requirements. It's not about being mean or sexist or whatever. It's about keeping people safe. Riley stabbed a piece of chicken with her fork. That's very thoughtful of you. The sarcasm in her voice was subtle enough that Brewster missed it completely, but a few people at nearby tables had started to notice what was happening. An older sailor with Chief Petty Officer insignia glanced over, raised an eyebrow, then went back to his meal with a slight smile. He clearly knew something the recruits didn't. I'm serious, Brewster pressed on. Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. I'm actually trying to help you out. Before you embarrass yourself in front of everyone, maybe you should consider whether you're really cut out for this. Can you even do 10 push-ups? Real ones, not the knee kind. One of his friends laughed. Dude, remember that one girl in basic who couldn't get through the obstacle course? She cried for like an hour. Yeah, and then she quit the next day, another added. Some people just aren't built for this life. Riley set down her fork and wiped her mouth with her napkin. She did it slowly, deliberately, the same way she did everything. Her dark eyes moved from one recruit to the next, taking in every detail, the way they stood, the way they held themselves, where they put their weight. She could read people like books, a skill she'd honed over years of high-stakes operations where understanding body language could mean the difference between life and death. You boys finished? She asked quietly. Finished? Brewster laughed. We're just getting started. Tell you what, if you can drop and give me 10 good push-ups right now, I'll personally apologize and leave you alone. But if you can't, you admit that maybe you should reconsider your career path. Deal? The mess hall had grown noticeably quieter. More people were watching now, though most were being subtle about it. Riley could see a female petty officer at a nearby table looking concerned, like she was considering whether to intervene. Riley stood up slowly. At her full height, the top of her head barely reached Brewster's shoulder. The size difference was comical. He probably outweighed her by 80 pounds of mostly muscle. His friends smirked at each other, clearly thinking this was going to be entertaining. She looked up at Brewster with an expression that gave away nothing. No anger, no fear, no frustration, just a calm, steady gaze that lasted several seconds longer than most people would find comfortable. You have 5 seconds to walk back to your table, she said quietly. Her voice wasn't loud, but something about it made everyone within earshot stop what they were doing. Brewster's grin faltered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. Or what, you gonna report us? For what? Having a conversation. 5, Riley said. Oh, come on. The red-haired recruit laughed nervously. She's counting. Guys, she's actually counting. 4. Brewster leaned in closer, that cocky smile back at full force. Let me guess, you're gonna go tell someone we hurt your feelings? 3. The female petty officer at the nearby table stood up, clearly about to say something. But an older master chief seated next to her put a gentle hand on her arm and shook his head slightly, still watching the scene unfold with that same knowing smile. 2. This is ridiculous, one of the other recruits muttered, but his voice lacked the confidence of a few moments ago. Something about the way Riley stood there, completely calm and still, was starting to unsettle them. Riley's eyes never left Brewster's face. She didn't blink, didn't fidget, didn't show any sign of nervousness or doubt. She simply existed in that moment with absolute certainty, like a coiled spring waiting to release. 1. The moment hung in the air like the second before thunder follows lightning. Brewster opened his mouth to say something clever, probably another joke at Riley's expense, but before he could get the words out, the mess hall doors burst open with a loud bang that made half the room jump. Attention! Someone shouted. The entire mess hall erupted into motion. Chairs scraped against the floor. As everyone shot to their feet, standing at rigid attention, trays clattered, conversations died mid-sentence, and the whole room transformed from a casual, dining space into something that looked more like a military formation. Everyone, except the 5 recruits standing around Riley's table. They were too focused on their target, too caught up in their little game of intimidation, to notice what was happening around them. Brewster was still leaning over the table, that confident smirk on his face. His buddies were still positioned in their semicircle, blocking Riley in. Commander Patricia Hayes strode through the mess hall like a force of nature. She was a woman in her late 40s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Behind her walked two Master Chiefs, both of them with enough ribbons and medals on their chests to make it clear they'd seen and done things most people couldn't imagine. The click of Commander Hayes's boots on the linoleum floor echoed through the now silent mess hall. Every step was precise, measured, carrying the weight of 30 years of naval service. She stopped about 10 feet from the scene, taking in the 5 recruits who still hadn't noticed her arrival. Riley remained exactly where she was, still standing calmly while surrounded by the 5 young men. Her expression hadn't changed. If anything, there might have been the tiniest hint of something in her eyes. Not quite amusement, but maybe a sort of resigned awareness that these recruits were about to learn a very hard lesson. Recruits. Commander Hayes' voice cut through the silence like a blade. It wasn't a shout she didn't need to shout. The authority in her tone was enough to make grown men flinch. All 5 recruits spun around so fast they practically tripped over their own feet. Their eyes went wide as they saw the commander, then even wider as they saw the rank on her collar. They scrambled to come to attention, arms snapping to their sides, chins up, shoulders back. But it was sloppy, panicked. The kind of attention stance you make when you know you're already in deep trouble. "Can someone explain to me?" Commander Hayes said slowly, walking toward them with deliberate steps, "why 5 recruits are surrounding one of my officers in my mess hall?" The blood drained from Brewster's face so fast he looked like he might pass out. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. The red-haired recruit next to him looked like he might actually be sick. "Officer?" Brewster finally managed to croak out. "But there's no rank insignia?" Commander Hayes finished for him. She was standing right in front of them now, and even though she was shorter than most of them, she somehow seemed to tower over the group. "Is that your excuse? You thought it was acceptable to harass someone because they weren't wearing their full uniform?" "Ma'am, we weren't—" one of the other recruits started. "Weren't what?" One of the Master Chiefs stepped forward. He was a massive man, built like a barrel, with a scar running down the left side of his face. "Weren't surrounding her? Weren't blocking her exit? Weren't making comments about her size and fitness level? Because from where I was sitting, that's exactly what you were doing." Riley still hadn't moved. She stood there with her hands relaxed at her sides, watching the scene unfold with that same calm expression. Several people in the mess hall were stealing glances at her now, and those who knew, really knew, were starting to smile. Commander Hayes walked a slow circle around the 5 recruits, inspecting them like a drill sergeant examining a particularly disappointing formation. "Do you know who this is?" she asked, gesturing toward Riley. Silence. None of them dared to answer. "This," Commander Hayes continued, stopping directly in front of Brewster, "is Lieutenant Commander Riley Chen, and you just made the biggest mistake of your very short military careers." The way she said Lieutenant Commander made it sound like a prison sentence. Brewster's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Sweat was starting to form on his forehead despite the air conditioning in the mess hall. "Lieutenant Commander Chen," Hayes continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "transferred here 4 days ago from Naval Special Warfare Command. Perhaps you've heard of them. They're the folks who handle our most elite operations." One of the recruits made a small whimpering sound. The red-haired one looked like he might actually cry. The second Master Chief, a leaner man with weathered features and eyes that had seen too much, stepped forward. "What the commander is trying to tell you, gentlemen, in her infinite patience, is that you just tried to intimidate a Navy SEAL." The words landed like a bomb. A Navy SEAL. The mess hall, already quiet, somehow became even more silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the other side of the building. Navy SEALs were legendary. Everyone knew about them, even if most of what they knew came from movies and books. They were the elite of the elite, the ones who jumped out of planes in the middle of the night, who operated behind enemy lines, who did things that never made the news because they were too classified to talk about, and they were tough. Brutally, impossibly tough. The 5 recruits stood frozen. All that confidence, all that swagger, all those cocky grins, gone in an instant. They looked like children who just realized they'd broken something very expensive in a store they couldn't afford. Brewster's voice came out as barely a whisper. A seal? Not just a seal, Commander Hayes said, and now there was something almost dangerous in her voice. One of the first women to complete the training. Do you have any idea how difficult that is? Do you have any concept of what she had to endure? What she had to prove to earn that trident? Riley shifted slightly, her weight moving from one foot to the other. It was the first time she'd moved in several minutes. She caught the commander's eye and gave a tiny shake of her head. A silent communication that said this didn't need to become a bigger thing than it already was. But Commander Hayes wasn't done. Lieutenant Commander Chen has completed 3 combat deployments. She holds a Bronze Star with Valor for actions in Syria that I can't discuss because they're still classified. She's qualified in airborne operations, combat diving, and more weapon systems than you 5 combined will ever touch in your entire careers. Each word landed like a physical blow. The recruits seemed to shrink with every sentence. And you, Hayes continued, turning her full attention to Brewster, thought it would be entertaining to question whether she could do 10 push-ups. Brewster looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Ma'am, we didn't know. There was no way to what? To know that you shouldn't harass someone? To understand that appearance isn't everything? To show basic respect to a fellow service member regardless of their rank or position? Hayes' voice rose slightly. Is that what they're teaching in basic training these days? No, ma'am. All 5 recruits mumbled in unison. Riley finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. Commander, if I may. Hayes turned to her, and some of the fire in her eyes cooled just a little. Lieutenant Commander Chen, these men are new. They made a mistake. Riley looked at each of the recruits in turn. A big mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. I think we can use this as a teaching moment rather than a disciplinary one. The recruits looked at her with something approaching hope. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't about to get kicked out of the Navy on their 3rd week. But then Riley smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile a shark might give right before it strikes. I'd like to request permission to take these 5 under my supervision for a special training session, Riley said, still looking at the recruits. Tomorrow morning, 0500 hours, the obstacle course. The hope in the recruits' eyes died instantly. Everyone in the mess hall who had military experience knew what that meant. A special training session with a SEAL starting before dawn was going to be something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. And not in a good way. Commander Hayes considered this for a moment, then nodded. Permission granted. I think that's more than fair given the circumstances. Thank you, ma'am, Riley said. The barrel-chested Master Chief couldn't quite hide his grin. Oh, you boys are in for a treat. A real treat. Brewster found his voice again, though it came out shaky. Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander, we're very sorry. Truly sorry. We were completely out of line and... Riley held up one hand, cutting him off. Save it, words are easy. Actions matter. Tomorrow morning, you'll have a chance to show me what you're really made of. Until then, I suggest you get a good night's sleep. You're going to need it. The way she said it made it clear that sleep would be in short supply after tomorrow. The recruits looked at each other with expressions of pure dread. Now, Commander Hayes said, I believe Lieutenant Commander Chen was trying to enjoy her lunch before you 5 decided to provide entertainment for the entire mess hall. I suggest you return to your table, finish your meals quietly, and spend the rest of the day thinking very carefully about how you ended up in this situation. Yes, ma'am. They responded in unison, their voices cracking slightly. The 5 recruits practically ran back to their table. They sat down stiffly, staring at their trays like they contained the answers to the universe. None of them took a single bite of food. They just sat there, occasionally glancing at Riley with looks of absolute terror. The mess hall slowly came back to life. People returned to their meals and conversations, though the volume was notably lower than before. Everyone was talking about what just happened, stealing glances at Riley and whispering to their neighbors. Commander Hayes walked over to Riley's table and sat down in the chair Brewster had occupied moments before. The 2 Master Chiefs joined them, pulling up seats. You handled that well, Hayes said quietly, with more restraint than I would have shown at your age. Riley picked up her fork and went back to her chicken like nothing had happened. They're kids. Stupid kids, but kids. They'll learn. Or wash out trying, the barrel-chested Master Chief added with a chuckle. You planning something special for tomorrow? Just a basic orientation, Riley said, taking a bite of her now cold food. Show them what real training looks like. Nothing they won't survive. The other Master Chief laughed. Nothing they won't survive. I love it. The rest of that Tuesday passed in a blur for the 5 recruits. They sat in their afternoon classes, barely hearing a word their instructor said. Every few minutes, one of them would glance at another, and they'd exchange looks of pure panic. Other recruits who'd heard about the mess hall incident kept their distance, like the 5 of them carried some kind of contagious bad luck. By dinner time, the story had spread across the entire base. It grew with each retelling, as stories do. Some versions had Riley jumping over the table and putting all 5 recruits on the ground in under 10 seconds. Others claimed she'd been wearing civilian clothes and working undercover. The truth was dramatic enough, but the military loved a good legend. Brewster couldn't eat. He pushed his food around his plate while his stomach churned. He kept replaying the scene in his head, his cocky words, his stupid grin, the way he'd leaned on her table like he owned the place. Every memory made him feel smaller. We're so screwed, the red-haired recruit muttered. His name was Danny Torres, and he looked like he hadn't slept since the incident. Do you guys know what SEALs do to people? I heard they can make you think you're drowning without even putting you in water. That's waterboarding, you idiot, another one snapped. His name was Kevin Park, and he'd been the one to make the comment about women crying during obstacle courses. And they don't do that in training, probably. Oh, that makes me feel so much better, Danny shot back. We only harassed one of the deadliest people in the entire military. What could possibly go wrong? The 5th recruit, a quiet guy named Lucas Wright, who'd mostly just stood there during the whole thing, finally spoke up. We should apologize. Really apologize. Maybe she'll go easier on us. Did you see her face? Brewster said quietly. She's not going easy on us. She's going to make an example out of us, and honestly, we deserve it. That night, none of them slept well. Brewster lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the barracks, snoring, the occasional cough, footsteps of the night watch passing by. He thought about his high school football days when he was the big man on campus, when everything came easy. He'd joined the military thinking it would be more of the same. He was quickly learning how wrong he'd been. At 4:30 in the morning, all 5 of them were awake before their alarms went off. They dressed in silence, putting on their PT gear with shaking hands. The barracks were still mostly asleep, but a few early risers watched them with knowing looks. Good luck, someone called out as they headed for the door. You're gonna need it. The November morning was cold and dark. A thick fog had rolled in from the ocean, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. The obstacle course was on the far side of the base, a 15-minute walk that felt like a march to their own execution. They arrived at 04:55, 5 minutes early, standing in formation at the entrance to the course. The fog made everything look ghostly and surreal. They could hear the ocean in the distance, waves crashing against the shore with a steady rhythm. At exactly 0500 hours, Riley appeared out of the fog like a phantom. She wore full combat gear, boots, fatigues, tactical vest loaded with weight plates, and a pack on her back that had to weigh at least 40 pounds. Her hair was pulled back tight and her face was completely neutral. She stopped in front of them and looked each one in the eye. The silence stretched out uncomfortably. Good morning, she finally said. Her voice was calm, almost friendly. Somehow that made it worse. Good morning, ma'am, they responded, their voices cracking in unison. Riley walked a slow circle around them, just like Commander Hayes had done the day before, but this time there was no audience, no witnesses. Just 6 people in the fog, about to begin something none of the recruits would ever forget. Here's how today is going to work, Riley said, stopping in front of them again. For the next 12 hours, you're going to get a tiny glimpse into what SEAL training is actually like. Not the Hollywood version, the real thing. You questioned whether I could do 10 push-ups. By the end of today, you're going to question whether you can do 1 more of anything. Brewster's throat felt dry, but he forced himself to speak. Ma'am, before we start, we need to say something. We were completely wrong yesterday. We judged you based on appearances. We were disrespectful, arrogant, and out of line. There's no excuse for what we did. The other 4 nodded vigorously. Riley studied him for a long moment. You're right. There's no excuse. But I appreciate the apology. Here's the thing about respect in the military. It's not given, it's earned. Not through words, but through actions. Today you're going to earn back a tiny fraction of the respect you threw away yesterday. She turned and started walking toward the obstacle course. Follow me, and keep up. What happened over the next 12 hours would become the stuff of legend on that base. Riley started them with a 5-mile run. Not a jog, a run. And she ran with them, carrying that 40-pound pack, staying ahead of them the entire time. When Brewster, the former football star, started to fall behind at mile 3, Riley circled back and ran beside him. Come on, Brewster, she said, not even breathing hard. I thought you were concerned about people meeting physical standards. He wanted to quit. Every muscle in his legs screamed at him to stop. But something about the way she said it, without mockery or cruelty, just stating a fact, made him push harder. He finished the run, barely, and immediately collapsed on the ground. On your feet, Riley said. We're just getting started. The obstacle course was next. It was a brutal series of walls to climb, ropes to scale, bars to traverse, and mud pits to crawl through. Riley demonstrated each obstacle first, moving through them with a fluid grace that made it look easy. She climbed walls that seemed impossible, pulled herself across monkey bars without apparent effort, and emerged from mud pits looking like she'd barely exerted herself. Then it was their turn. Danny fell off the rope climb 3 times before he made it to the top. Kevin got stuck on the wall climb, his arms shaking so badly he couldn't pull himself up. Lucas made it further than the others but threw up halfway through the monkey bars. Brewster pushed through on pure stubbornness, falling and getting back up over and over again. Riley watched everything. She corrected their form, pointed out where they were wasting energy, showed them better techniques. She never yelled, never mocked them. She just pushed them to keep going. In SEAL training, she said as they struggled through the course for the 3rd time, you learn that the only easy day was yesterday. You learn that your body can do things your mind says are impossible. You learn that quitting is always an option, but it's never the right option. Around hour 6, something started to shift. The recruits were exhausted beyond anything they'd experienced before. Their hands were bloody from the rope climbs. Their muscles felt like rubber, and they'd lost count of how many times they'd face-planted in the mud. But they stopped complaining. They stopped looking at each other with fear and started looking at each other with determination. Riley introduced them to log PT, taking a massive wooden log and lifting it, carrying it, doing squats with it while it rested on their shoulders. This was a team exercise. If one person failed, they all failed. This is what SEALs do, Riley explained as they struggled under the weight of the log. We work as a unit. One person's weakness becomes everyone's problem. One person's strength helps everyone succeed. Brewster was positioned at the front of the log. His shoulders burned like fire, but he could hear Danny behind him gasping for air, struggling. Without thinking, Brewster adjusted his position to take more of the weight, giving Danny a tiny bit of relief. Riley noticed. She didn't say anything, but she noticed. The morning gave way to afternoon. Riley taught them hand-to-hand combat techniques, showing them how leverage and technique could overcome size and strength. She demonstrated on Brewster, putting him on the ground 3 times in under 30 seconds despite him outweighing her by nearly 80 pounds. Size matters, she said, helping him back to his feet. But training matters more. Technique matters more. Mental toughness matters more. She had them practice the moves on each other, correcting their form, teaching them the principles behind each technique. They were clumsy and slow, but they were learning. Around hour 9, Riley had them do underwater exercises in the base pool. They had to retrieve weighted objects from the bottom, swim laps with their clothes on, tread water while holding weights above their heads. Kevin nearly panicked during one underwater exercise, but Riley was in the water immediately, helping him to the surface, making sure he was okay. Fear is natural, she told him calmly. Panic is giving in to that fear. You control your mind or your mind controls you. By hour 10, all 5 recruits looked like they'd been through a war. They were covered in mud, soaking wet, bleeding from a dozen minor cuts and scrapes, and so tired they could barely stand. But something had changed in their eyes. The cockiness was gone, replaced by something harder, something more real. Riley gathered them together as the afternoon sun started to sink toward the horizon. She'd been pushing them for 10 straight hours, and she looked like she could go for 10 more. Final evolution, she announced. 1 more obstacle course run. All of you together. Fastest time wins nothing. But if anyone quits, you all start over. They looked at each other. Every single one of them wanted to quit. Every muscle screamed for rest. But none of them moved hoo-yah. Brewster said quietly. It was the SEAL battle cry, and he had no right to use it. But it felt appropriate. Riley's expression softened just slightly. Let's go. They ran that course one more time. They helped each other over walls, pulled each other through the mud, encouraged each other when it seemed impossible. When Danny's arms gave out on the rope climb, Brewster climbed up beside him and talked him through it. When Lucas couldn't make the monkey bars, Kevin stayed with him until he succeeded. They finished together, all 5 of them, collapsing in a heap at the end of the course as the sun painted the sky orange and pink. Riley stood over them as they lay gasping on the ground, chests heaving, every inch of their bodies screaming in protest. The fog had burned off hours ago, and now the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the obstacle course. 12 hours. They'd been at it for 12 straight hours. She pulled off her tactical vest and set it down. Even after everything she'd put them through, after running every course with them, demonstrating every exercise, she barely looked winded. She crouched down so she was at eye level with them. Everybody up, she said quietly. One last thing. They groaned but obeyed, pulling themselves to their feet with shaking legs. They stood in a rough line, swaying slightly, looking like they might collapse at any moment. Their PT uniforms were torn, caked with dried mud and sweat. Kevin had a nasty scrape on his elbow. Danny's hands were wrapped in makeshift bandages from the rope climbs. Lucas had a black eye from when he'd face-planted during the wall climb. Brewster's knees were bleeding through his pants. They looked absolutely destroyed. And somehow they looked better than they had that morning. Riley walked down the line, looking each of them in the eye. What you experienced today was maybe 5% of what SEAL candidates go through. 5%. And this was the easy version. No hell week, no hypothermia, no sleep deprivation beyond what you're feeling right now. Do you understand that? Yes, ma'am. They responded, their voices hoarse from 12 hours of exertion. The real training lasts 6 months, Riley continued. The dropout rate is typically around 70 to 80%. That means most people who try don't make it. These are people who were at the top of their game, the best of the best from their units, and they still don't make it. She paused in front of Brewster. Do you know why I became a SEAL? He shook his head, too tired to speak. Because every single day of my life someone told me I couldn't. Too small, too weak, wrong gender, not built for it. Every instructor, every doubter, every person who looked at me and saw limitations instead of potential. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath, and every single one of them was wrong. Riley moved on to Danny. I had to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified. I had to prove myself over and over again, and you know what? That made me better. It made me stronger, not just physically but mentally. She continued down the line. The training didn't just teach me how to jump out of planes or clear buildings or survive in hostile territory. It taught me that the human body and mind are capable of far more than we think. It taught me that the only real limits are the ones we put on ourselves. Riley stepped back so she could see all of them. Yesterday in that mess hall you saw someone small and assumed they were weak. You made judgments based on appearance. That's lazy thinking. And lazy thinking gets people killed in combat situations. Brewster finally found his voice. Ma'am, I understand that now. We all do. We were completely wrong about you, about everything. It's not about being wrong about me, Riley corrected. It's about the mindset that led you to make those judgments in the first place. The military is changing. We have women in combat roles, in special operations, in positions that were closed to them for decades. And some of them are better at these jobs than men who've been doing it their whole careers. She let that sink in for a moment. But here's what really matters. None of that should surprise anyone. Capability isn't about gender or size or what you look like in a uniform. It's about training, dedication, mental toughness, and the refusal to quit when everything in you wants to give up. You felt that today. Every single one of you wanted to quit. I saw it, but you didn't. Kevin spoke up, his voice shaky. Why didn't you just have us punished? Written up? We deserved it, Riley almost smiled. Because paperwork doesn't teach lessons that last. Pain does, exhaustion does. Pushing through something you thought was impossible does. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up and every muscle in your body hurts, you'll remember today. And hopefully you'll remember why. She walked over to her tactical vest and picked it up. You 5 are going to continue your training here on base. In a few weeks, you'll start your specialized training for whatever rate you're pursuing. Some of you might wash out. Some of you might go on to have long, successful careers. That's up to you. Riley turned back to face them. But I want you to remember something. The person you were yesterday, the one who thought it was funny to harass someone in the mess hall, that person was weak. Not physically. Physically, you're all in decent shape. But mentally, morally, that person was weak. The person standing here now after 12 hours of hell, after pushing through every excuse your mind gave you to quit, that person is stronger. Brewster stepped forward. His legs shook with the effort, but he came to attention as best he could. Ma'am, permission to speak freely? Granted. I was the ringleader yesterday. The others followed me. If there are consequences, official consequences, I'll take full responsibility. He glanced at his fellow recruits. They don't deserve to have their careers ruined because I was an arrogant jerk. That's noble, Riley said. But that's not how the military works. You're all responsible for your own actions. Torres could have walked away. Park could have called you out. Wright could have said something. You all made choices. Danny stepped forward to stand beside Brewster. Then we all take responsibility together. As a unit, the others joined them, forming a line. They looked like a strong wind could knock them over, but they stood together. Riley studied them for a long moment. Good. That's the first smart decision you've made since I met you. Unit cohesion matters. Having your teammates back matters. But so does accountability. She pulled out her phone and made a call. Commander Hayes? Lieutenant Commander Chen. The training session is complete. Yes, ma'am, all 5 are still standing. Barely, but standing. I'd like to make a recommendation regarding disciplinary action. The recruits held their breath. I recommend we put them on probation for the remainder of their training. Any additional infractions, any behavioral issues, and they face the full consequences. But give them a chance to prove today meant something. Yes, ma'am. I'll file the formal report tomorrow. Thank you. She hung up and looked at the recruits. You just got very lucky. Commander Hayes agrees with my recommendation. You're on probation. That means every instructor on this base is going to be watching you. One mistake, one incident, one moment of the old attitude, and you're done. Understood? Yes, ma'am. They shouted in unison, and this time their voices carried real conviction. Good. Now get yourselves to medical, get cleaned up, eat something, and get some sleep. You're going to hurt like hell tomorrow. That's normal. Hydrate, stretch, and take care of those wounds properly. Riley picked up her pack and started to walk away, then stopped. Oh, and Brewster? Yes, ma'am? You did good today. All of you did. The difference between who you were yesterday and who you became today is the difference between being a recruit and being a sailor. Don't go backward. She walked off into the gathering darkness, leaving the 5 of them standing there in stunned silence. They limped toward the medical building together, nobody speaking for several minutes. Finally, Lucas broke the silence. I don't think I can feel my legs. I don't think I have legs anymore, Kevin added. I think they fell off somewhere around hour 8. Worth it, though, Danny said quietly. I mean, it was horrible, but worth it, Brewster nodded. She could have ended our careers today. Instead, she gave us something better. What's that? Torres asked. A chance to be better than we were. Over the next few days, the story of what happened on the obstacle course spread through the base just like the mess hall incident had. But this version of the story was different. This one was about 5 recruits who'd made a terrible mistake and gotten a second chance. About a SEAL who'd chosen to teach instead of punish. About the kind of leader people actually wanted to follow. The 5 recruits became something of a curiosity on base. Other sailors would point them out, whispering about the guys who'd survived a day of training with Lieutenant Commander Chen. Some asked questions. Others kept their distance, afraid that whatever bad luck the 5 had attracted might be contagious. But the 5 of them had changed. They showed up early to every training session. They helped other recruits who were struggling. They never complained, never made excuses, never badmouthed anyone. When they saw someone being treated unfairly, they spoke up. When they saw someone being harassed, they intervened. Brewster in particular underwent a transformation. The cocky football star who thought his size and natural ability made him superior disappeared. In his place was someone who actually listened, who asked questions, who worked twice as hard as anyone else to prove he'd learned his lesson. He started showing up at the obstacle course on his own time, running through it over and over, pushing himself. Other recruits noticed and started joining him. Before long, there was an informal morning PT group that met at 0500, running the course together, helping each other improve. Riley would sometimes appear out of nowhere, watching from a distance. She never interrupted, never offered commentary, just watched. And occasionally, very occasionally, she'd give a small nod of approval before disappearing again. 3 weeks after the incident, Brewster was in the mess hall eating lunch when a group of new recruits came in. They were loud, cocky, fresh out of basic training and thinking they knew everything. He watched as they started making comments about a female sailor sitting alone at a table. Brewster didn't hesitate. He set down his fork, stood up, and walked over to where the new recruits were gathering around the female sailor's table. The scene was sickeningly familiar. 5 guys thinking they were being funny. A woman trying to ignore them and finish her meal in peace. "Hey," Brewster said firmly, stepping between the recruits and the woman. "You guys need to move along." The tallest of the new recruits, a guy with an attitude that reminded Brewster painfully of his former self, laughed. "Who made you the mess hall police?" "We're just being friendly." "No, you're not. You're being disrespectful. And trust me when I say you don't want to go down this road." Brewster's voice was calm but carried an edge of authority he'd earned through hard experience. "Or what?" another recruit challenged, puffing out his chest. Before Brewster could respond, Danny, Kevin, and Lucas appeared at his sides. The 4 of them stood together, a unified front. The message was clear without anyone having to spell it out. The female sailor looked up at Brewster with surprise. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but I can handle this." "I'm sure you can, petty officer," Brewster said, noting her rank. "But you shouldn't have to. Not in your own mess hall." The new recruits, suddenly outnumbered and facing people who clearly knew more about base life than they did, backed off. They muttered some half-hearted excuses and returned to their own table. Crisis averted. The petty officer smiled at them. "That was decent of you guys. Not many people speak up." "We learned from the best," Danny said, glancing toward the corner of the mess hall where Riley sat with some other instructors, watching the whole scene unfold. Riley caught their eye and gave the slightest nod before returning to her conversation. That small acknowledgement meant more to them than any formal commendation could have. As the weeks turned into months, the 5 recruits continued their training. They faced the same challenges as everyone else: grueling physical tests, complex technical training, mental exhaustion, moments of doubt. But they faced it all differently than they might have before that day on the obstacle course. Brewster requested a meeting with Riley 6 weeks after the incident. He found her in one of the training buildings reviewing course materials for her next class. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, standing at attention in her doorway. "Brewster, come in." She gestured to a chair. "At ease." He sat down, suddenly nervous. "Ma'am, I wanted to let you know that I've put in a request to try out for Special Operations training. Not SEAL, I know I'm not there yet, but Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman. I think it might be a path that suits me." Riley studied him. "That's a tough program. Different from SEALs, but just as demanding in its own way. What made you interested?" "Honestly, that day on the obstacle course, I realized I'd been coasting my whole life on natural ability. Sports came easy, basic training was manageable, everything just kind of fell into my lap." He looked down at his hands. "But what you showed us that day, that took something more than just natural talent. It took dedication, real discipline, the kind of mental strength that you have to build over time. I want to develop that." "It's going to be hard," Riley said. "You'll have to prove yourself all over again." "I know. And honestly, after what I did to you, I don't deserve an easy path. But I'm ready to work for it." Riley leaned back in her chair. "I'm going to write you a recommendation letter. Not because I think you're ready, you're not. But because you've shown the capacity to learn from your mistakes, and that's rarer than you'd think. What you do with that opportunity is up to you." Brewster's eyes widened. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you complete the training. If you complete it," she pulled out a notebook. "Now let's talk about what you need to work on before you even think about showing up to selection." They spent the next hour going over his fitness levels, his swimming abilities, his weaknesses and strengths. Riley was brutally honest, pointing out every area where he needed improvement. But she also gave him a training plan, exercises to focus on, skills to develop. "One more thing," Riley said as Brewster was leaving. "That thing you did in the mess hall a few weeks ago, standing up for that petty officer, that showed character. Keep doing that." "Yes, ma'am. I will." 3 months after the original incident, Commander Hayes called all 5 recruits into her office. They stood at attention, hearts pounding. wondering if somehow their probation had been violated without them realizing it. At ease, Hayes said, gesturing for them to relax. You're not in trouble. Actually, the opposite. Your probationary period is officially over as of today. Your records will reflect that you completed it successfully. The relief in the room was palpable. However, Hayes continued, I didn't call you here just to tell you that. I wanted you to hear something. She pulled up a document on her computer. This is an after-action report from Lieutenant Commander Chen. She submitted it yesterday. I'm going to read you a portion of it. She cleared her throat and began reading. The 5 recruits in question demonstrated exceptional growth over the past 3 months. Their commitment to improvement, both as individuals and as a unit, exceeded expectations. They have become positive influences on their peers and have shown the kind of character and integrity that the Navy needs in its future leaders. I recommend their probation be lifted, and that they be considered for advanced training opportunities as they progress in their careers. Hayes looked up from the screen. That's high praise coming from someone like Chen. She doesn't give compliments lightly. Ma'am, Danny spoke up, we don't deserve that. Not after what we did. Maybe not at the time, Hayes agreed. But people aren't defined by their worst moment. They're defined by what they do after. You 5 took a terrible situation and turned it into an opportunity to become better sailors. That's worth recognizing. She stood up and walked around her desk. The military is full of second chances, but only for people who are willing to do the work to earn them. You did that work. Now keep doing it for the rest of your careers. Yes, ma'am, they responded in unison. As they left Hayes's office, they nearly ran into Riley in the hallway. She was carrying a stack of training materials heading to her next class. Lieutenant Commander, Brewster said. The others stopped with him. Riley paused. Something I can help you with? We just wanted to say thank you. For everything. For giving us a second chance when you could have ended our careers. For teaching us what it really means to be sailors. Riley held up a hand, cutting him off. Stop. You don't need to thank me. You did the hard work. I just pointed you in the right direction. She shifted her materials to her other arm. But I will say this. What you've done over the past 3 months, the way you've carried yourselves, the way you've helped others and stood up for people who needed it, that makes all the difference. That's who you really are, not the idiots who cornered someone in a mess hall. Ma'am, Lucas said quietly, you changed our lives that day. No, Riley corrected gently. I gave you 12 hours of hell. You changed your own lives by deciding what to do with it. There's a difference. She started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Brewster? I submitted that recommendation letter yesterday. Do me proud, I will, ma'am. I promise. 6 months later, Brewster was accepted into Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewman training. The day he left for selection, the other 4 came to see him off. They stood together, one